Now, it is a contest that's been billed as something of a microcosm of the battle for the soul of the Democrat Party, a stark divide between party tradition and a rising tide of progressive energy. Now, this is the Democrat primary in Michigan, with a razor-tight battle between the more moderate Haley Stevens and contender Abdel El-Sayed. Now, with 90% of the votes counted now, El-Sayed is ahead. He's on set to win, and he's already spoken to his supporters.
They want to tell us that here in Michigan, we're a purple state. That somehow everybody walks around wondering, I wonder where I stand on the left-right spectrum. When really, up and down the state, what you hear is, I wonder how I can afford my rent. I wonder how I can afford my groceries. I don't know what will happen if I get sick because I can't afford my deductible.
Well, joining us now is Emeritus Professor of Political Sciences at the American University of Paris, Steven Ekovich. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme today. A probable victory here then for the progressives. What would you say that means?
Well, it means, as your introduction pointed out, that the Democratic Party is divided. Let's remember, however, that the progressive wing, some call it even the far left wing, or the Democratic Socialist wing, can win primaries, and they could probably even win elections, but they usually do it in very blue congressional districts or in very blue states or in a very blue city like New York, where the mayor is now Mamdani. So the points out this schism in the Democratic Party. The problem here is that, and we're going to see this now, if indeed the Democratic candidate is El-Sayed, Abdul El-Sayed, the polls show that it's going to be, for the moment, it's going to be difficult for him to win the general election against the Republican. Now, let's remember one thing. There are 50 states, and well, there are 51 voting districts, including the District of Columbia. Each of them has different rules regarding primaries. In Michigan, we have an open primary. That means that you don't need any party affiliation, for example, to vote in the Democratic primary. So that means there were probably independents who voted one way or another. But we can also imagine that since the Republican candidate is already known, we can imagine Republicans deliberately voting for the least viable candidate on the Democratic Party in order to have that Democratic representative face off against the Republican. Because the polls do show, for the moment, that in a matchup between El-Sayed and Mike Rogers, the Republican candidate, that Mike Rogers will probably win.
I mean, you're right, isn't it? It's going to be a huge problem for the Democrats if they're heading into the midterms effectively as a split party.
Well, and already the split party has already looks like has given the nomination to El-Sayed, because the other Democratic candidate, Mallory McMorrow, she won 4% of the vote. If you put together her 4% with Stevens' 47%, well, the Democratic candidate, well, Stevens would have won the primary and would have been the establishment candidate, the moderate candidate, for the Democratic Party. And the moderate can more easily win in a state like Michigan, a swing state. So this may very well have cost the Democrats the Senate, because there was a possibility that they needed to win net 4 seats in order to win a 51-seat majority in the Senate. Now, this election was defending a Democratic seat. So in the general election, if the Democrats lose it, that means now they would have to win 5 other elections, senatorial elections, in order to win that very thin majority in the Senate. So, in fact, this is a good news for the left wing of the Republican Party, but it's bad news for the Democratic Party in general.
For people who don't follow US politics like perhaps as closely as you do, I mean, what do you see as the big difference, if you like, between the two sides?
The moderate wing is very pragmatic, moderate on their political positions. the left wing, and this was one of the accusations lodged against al-Sayed, tends to take excessive positions like defunding the police. In fact, al-Sayed was accused of promoting that in the past. Completely eliminating ICE, that is the immigration police, right? Having a foreign policy that goes out of the mainstream, particularly in regards Israel currently, and even the war in Iraq, against Iran. For example, Stevens was rather pro-Palestinian, was supported by the major Israeli lobby, AIPAC, said there was not a genocide in against Hamas. Those positions were the contrary taken by al-Sayed. Now, usually foreign policy is not an important question in a state election or a local election, except when the United States is at war, and the United States is at war.
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is, though, a lot of those policies that you're talking about there do appeal, don't they, to a lot of Democrat voters?
Yeah, but that's not a majority of them. That's the problem. Now, in a primary election, and we saw it in this election, turnout matters. And that means that the most zealous wings of either party, the right or the left, tend to turn out more of their voters than the more moderates. But once again, the fact that Michigan is an open primary clouds this dynamic, where motivation and zeal turns out the extreme wings of the parties. So it's difficult today. It's always difficult this far ahead of a general election. It's still far ahead of a general election to predict how this might turn out. Nevertheless, it's a bad sign. It's a bad omen. Once again, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party tends to win when it's already in a very blue district. So the Democrats going to win anyhow. It's and this usually happens in major cities. Where the progressives have a certain advantage or have a certain bridgehead. And it also, the progressive wing usually can also count on congressional districts where there's an important university presence, because in university districts, the students who tend to be in their youth more progressive than the general population also can tend to swing the vote to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Steven Ekovich, thanks very much for being with us, Emeritus Professor there of Political Sciences at the American University of Paris.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Okay.